You're listening to episode 240 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practices from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Yeshe Rabgye joins us to speak about pragmatic aspects of Buddha's teaching. What's it like to be a monastic in a Tibetan tradition teaching secular mindfulness in India? Oddly enough, this combination does exist, and a secular approach to Buddhism is of more interest than traditional Buddhism, even when the teacher is a monastic. Karma Yeshe Rabgye is a Western monk in the Kagyu tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. Originally from England, he now lives in Ashoka Buddhist Temple, Kudaaleshwar, northern India, where he teaches Buddhism and meditation classes to people of all ages. Although Yeshe learnt from the great Tibetan Buddhist masters in exile, his Western background forced him to question some difficult elements of the teachings, in particular to distinguish those teachings that were essential aspects of the path from those that were mere cultural embellishments. Yeshe spent several years in a monastery in the foothills of the Himalayas, teaching young monks basic Buddhist philosophy and meditation. He now offers teachings freely, does not demand students to blindly accept what he says, but instead invites them to examine their own minds and experiences to discover the validity of Gautama Buddha's teachings. So sit back, relax, and have a nice oolong with just a hint of mint. Our guest today is Karma Yeshe Rabgye. Yeshe, welcome back to the podcast. Nice to speak with you again.
Yeah, thank you, Ted. It's nice to be back. I think this is the third time now.
Third time, yes. I think you're right. I'm very glad to have you here. So are you still at Ashoka Buddhist Temple?
Yeah, this is my base now, really, because my charity, the charity that I started in India, is based here in the grounds of the temple. So this will be my base in India. So I travel around different places in India and also recently Canada and UK. But this is my base. This is what I keep coming home to. This is what I call home now.
Wonderful. And I know that for your first book, you're doing a crowdfunding project, and I wanted to mention that, and I'll be linking it on the episode page for this as well. Tell us about that effort.
Yeah, my first book is a more traditional type of Buddhist book. And I tried to write a book that was jargon-free. So many people were coming to me here in India and telling me that they would like the book in Hindi because there's not many Buddhist books in Hindi for them to read and understand. And the people that were coming were mainly what we call the Dalits. So, I mean, years ago, they used to be called the horrible name of untouchables. So these are the lower class people. And they're not allowed to go into Hindu temples. People can't touch them. I mean, really, their lives are awful. So there was a person called Dr. Ambedkar. And he actually wrote the constitution for India. And he decided himself was also a Dalit. So he decided to convert and start converting the Dalits into Buddhists. So they don't have this tag of untouchables, and so they can go into Buddhist temples and do their prayers and give them a better sense of belonging. So it was this type of people that were coming to me and asking me to get the book translated, because now they call themselves Buddhists, but they don't know very much about Buddhism. So this is what drove me to get the book translated. So it's taken me over a year. I've only recently, I do live in India, so I've only recently just heard about crowdfunding. I had seen crowdfunding before for a Buddhist film or something, but I didn't really understand what it was. And then I think somebody told me about it, so I looked into it. So now the project is funded and the translation work is starting. So I spent about 2 months going through my book and rewriting it, changing it, making it more for the Indian audience, taking out all the Western things and putting in Indian things they could relate to, and moving the book around, the chapters around and everything. So actually, I quite enjoyed that. So when it comes out, it'll be called The Buddha's Path to Freedom, but in Hindi. Don't ask me what that is, please.
Excellent. Well, good luck with that. I'm glad that's working. It's funded now. And I want to shift to another topic. We've been emailing back and forth so that listeners are aware of this. And you mentioned that you started a secular meditation center. And I want, in addition to telling us about that, just take a moment to describe the context of you're a Westerner in a Tibetan tradition in India, teaching at a secular center. So there's a little bit of a confluence there.
You think?
Just a little.
When I came into Buddhism, like most people who come into Tibetan Buddhism, I was a little bit blinded by the theatre of it. All the noise and all the drama behind it, and all the puja and the prayers and everything.
Bells and smells is the term that I've heard recently.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, that's exactly what kind of drew me to the Tibetan tradition. That, and that I was in the Western order of Buddhism, and it didn't go far enough for me. So I started doing all my formal training in Buddhist philosophy and everything. But it became apparent to me that I wasn't really engaging with the ritual and the ceremonial side of Buddhism. It didn't speak to me. So, I started teaching basic Buddhism to the monks in the monastery here in India. And I tried to get them to think for themselves, not just blindly follow my words, but, to give it a bit of thought. Does this seem true? Does this fit into their worldview, whatever their worldview is? And that was quite difficult because, education over here is slightly different. It's not done on an individual basis. The teacher writes something on the blackboard. They write it down, they memorize it. When they have their exam question, they have to write it word for word. And that's the way they've been brought up over here. So if I said something, then they believed it. This led me to think that I could be teaching in a better way. I can be teaching, away from all the ritual, away from all the ceremonial side. So when I came to Chandigarh, where I am now, and started setting up the charity, people started coming to me and started asking me, can you teach me meditation? Can you teach me about Buddhism? And they didn't want to know about all the mythical side of it or anything. They really just wanted to know, how can they stop their suffering? There's a growing middle class in India. And of course, lots of people are reaching the point here where, okay, they've got their house now, they've got their car, they've got a nice job, they've bought everything that they need to buy. Now what? So they're kind of reaching this stage, and now what is really spirituality. So I really started teaching more on a spiritual level than a religious level. And it suits me better because I'm a much more spiritual person than I am a religious person. You know, by spirituality, what I'm talking about when I say the word spirituality, I'm talking about inner journey of your experiences, how you experience things. That's how I see the difference between religion. Religion is somebody else's experiences that you have to believe in, whereas spirituality is your own experience, how you perceive it, how you see it, how you can use it to reduce your suffering. So that's how I started to teach. And that's how my second book came about, The Life's Meandering Path, which is a secular book, because I think it reaches a bigger audience, not just in the West, but also in India here. That's how I started to lean towards a more secular approach. And, you know, if you look at the breakdown of my students, I don't have any Muslims at the moment, but I have lots of Sikh and mainly all Hindu people, and only the odd one or two Buddhist people that are coming to me. So a secular approach, you know, is much better. So then somebody really kindly offered me a center. It was just an empty shell, and then over the last like 9 months, we started setting it up into a meditation center. So that's how I became to open up a secular meditation center, because I think it helps people. You know, I'm not going to go in there and ram Buddhism down their throats. I'm just going to try to help them on their path to a more spiritual life, a more responsible life. And also, while I was setting up this meditation center, it was summer here. So I was leading meditation sessions in a local park, and we would do every Tuesday and Thursday evening. And people would just come and sit, sometimes 10, 15 people, sometimes 25 people. But, you know, the more people that came, the more that I saw that my approach should be more secular. So, and that's why I started to open this center, and it's only recently open, but it's starting to do well, and more people are talking about it and coming for sessions. So I do 5 guided sessions a week there.
Yeah, it's interesting the way you describe why a secular approach seems to be working better is that it's touching people where they are, and there's not a mandate that they adopt a religious tradition which might not be their own. It's not to cast aspersions against their tradition or another or non-tradition, but just that this is something that reaches you as a person. And it's interesting because that's the exact point I was making with another person just today, an interview for a different podcast, is the secular approach is not antagonistic towards one's ideological beliefs. It's simply basing itself on a shared human experience.
Yeah, you know, I think that's the great thing about Buddhism. If you take it as a religion, then you're really boxing it in. But if you take it as a way of life, a set of guidelines to how to live your life, then you can fit it into any religion. Because if you believe in a God, you can still follow Buddha's path, because Buddha wasn't a God. So, there's no conflict there. And I think the secular approach will become more and more popular. Now, as people understand that it's a way of life, it's a way to live your life to reduce your suffering and reduce the suffering of people around you. Yeah, and it's interesting that it's also coming to India, because they are very religious people in India. I mean, they don't just say, I'm born Hindu or I'm born Sikh. I mean, they actually go and make offerings at temples. And so it's interesting that the secular approach is now working its way into their psyche.
You'd also mentioned in our communications that you're teaching mindfulness to school teachers. How has that been going? And you also made a recent trip to Canada.
I've been doing mindfulness, I don't know now, maybe over 35 years anyway. So, and when when I was taught mindfulness, of course, there was no science behind it. We were just told how to be mindful and go and practice it and, experience it. And I think, for me, that's the point of mindfulness. It's an experience. It's not a set of scientific rules. But of course, now people like the science and they like to know that, there's some proof behind it, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I tend to bring a different approach. I don't really get too hung up on the science side, because that's not been the way I've been taught it. I can teach from my own personal experience of it. And then now when I see that, oh, this is because it awakens your prefrontal cortex, and I was like, oh, that's how it works, is it? So for me, it's just like interesting to see the science that behind it. But I don't get too hung up, and I do teach people not to get too hung up on the science. But if the science leads you to mindfulness, great. But don't, put all your eggs in the science basket, because science changes. I mean, that's the whole point of science. As we get more informed, we can change the opinions of science. What's more important, or the most important, is your experience. How are you experiencing it? Does it work for you? It worked for me, mindfulness. So then I never ever thought about the science, because it was actually working for me. I could actually see a difference. Other people could see a difference. I tend to come from that angle. So because it started to get popular, I thought it would be good to teach it in just a few schools here in the local area. But so I set up a 4-week course for the teachers. So the teachers can then bring it into their classrooms. And then I go back to the schools and then support the teachers with their mindfulness practices and check to see that they're actually implementing it and it's working. And I have a mindfulness WhatsApp page, so they can contact me if there's anything they want to ask about. And so I thought, yeah, it would be something that would be good to do. And then it just took off. And then really I lost a bit of control of it. So many schools and there's only me. It was good. And at one of the schools, there was a visiting professor from a university in British Columbia in Canada. And he sat in on 2 of the sessions. And at the end, he said, we have a 3-day workshop for teachers in Canada, and I'd like you to come over. And I said to him, well, it's a long way to go for 3 days. So if I am coming over, it's best you set up lots of things for me to do, to make it worthwhile for paying my flight ticket all the way there. So I did this 3-day workshop, and actually it was great. I really, really enjoyed it. There was like around 65 teachers that came. It was all interactive, and we had a really good workshop. And actually I learned as well as them. I got some things from them that they were already doing, and yeah, it was good. And I also spoke at the university there and a yoga center there and a college. And so it was a good experience. So I hope really that the mindfulness is not just going to become a fad, people, mindfulness, mindfulness, mindfulness. I was on the flight over to Canada, and I opened the magazine, and in there was a bank from America that was advertising mindful banking. What the hell is that? And actually, if you put your money in the bank, you'd want them to be mindful with your money.
One would hope.
So I hope it doesn't get too much like a fad and people really start experiencing it and seeing the benefit in it, because there's huge, huge benefits in it.
Yeah, and you're right. And there's so much hype that we find today. And there are some things that get disparaged as being hype that might not be. And so it's sometimes a little hard to distinguish between what's something that people are finding helpful in their lives. And though it may not be the same thing that we're doing exactly, that doesn't make it bad. It's okay for some exploration, some experimentation to happen. I'm a little curious, Yeshe, you mentioned learning some things yourselves about what the teachers are already doing. Can you share some of what you found out?
So when we were doing exercises, they were coming up with some great exercises about how to, get the children in touch with their emotions. Also, how to check on feedback from the children. They had great ideas about, how they follow up on the practice. That's one thing, teaching the practice, but it's another thing to ensure that the practice is actually working. So they came up with some great ideas and great exercises. So I brought lots of exercises with me that they can do in the classroom, but they gave me more. So we swapped. It was good because, mine come from Indian based and they were coming from Western based. So it was good for both of us, really. I think, we both came away having learnt quite a bit.
Wonderful. And it's good to see that kind of reciprocal, collaborative, supportive way to learn and have workshops, that it's not just one way, but we can all learn something from each other.
Yeah, and I think why it stuck out for me was because over here it's not like that. As I said before, the education system is different and the teachers are different. So again, when I'm teaching the teachers, they will just listen and write it down. Very difficult to get questions. You ask any questions. No, no, no. You've told us everything. If you ask somebody in the West any questions, then be prepared for at least 1 hour of good questions. So it's a big difference. It's a cultural difference. So it was a good experience, and it was nice to go to the West and see how mindfulness is working in the schools there. So if people can carry on, if we can get the teachers to carry on with doing mindfulness in the schools, then the children are going to grow up with being able to be in touch with their emotions and their thoughts and their feelings. We're becoming so disconnected from our emotions and feelings. We're hiding them. We don't know most of the time that we're feeling anything. So if they can teach the children at this early age, then they really are going to set them up for the future.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, that with the rise in just teen suicide rates, for example, and what are the things we can possibly do to offset that? But I want to shift now to your new book, Ripples in the Stream, A Pragmatic Journey Through Gautama Buddha's Teachings. This is a collection from your blog posts, correct?
Yeah, this is my greatest hits, Ted.
The greatest hits.
Yeah.
So tell us about this. What made you select these particular posts to put in the book?
Yeah, well, actually, I started doing my blog about 3 years ago. And the 48 that are in the book are actually the most popular of the blogs. So I just went through and saw the ones that have had the most hits and the ones that I got the most feedback from, and I put them together in a book. So the first part is our old friend, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. So these like 10 blogs flow together. But then after that, then they're just random blogs. So one good thing about the book is you can just pick it up, open it, and start reading a few pages and put it down. So it's not a scholarly book. It's a good book just for picking up and stimulating your mind, really. The things that I've covered, like superstitions, and funnily enough, the superstition was one of my early ones, and it still gets so many hits. And there's still people are 50-50 divided on what I'm saying is true or not true. And there's other ones like I cover about what Buddhism's approach to homosexuality and euthanasia. The euthanasia also caused a stir. But actually, the one that has always caused a stir is the one about rebirth. And the title used is Rebirth Doesn't Matter. So, of course, that's a little bit provocative. But my point, what I was trying to make, so many people have been writing to me over the years and saying that I'm not a Buddhist. And it's nice of them to take the time to point that out to me.
To make that judgment. It's very kind of them, yes.
Yeah, it is actually. I mean, they do actually take the time to sit down and open their computer and type an email to me just to tell me that I'm not Buddhist. So, it is good of the effort they put in there. So what I was just saying in there is that if you believe in rebirth, it's okay. As long as, you're a good person in this life and, you're a compassionate person and your compassion doesn't stem from just wanting a good rebirth, your compassion is actually a more selfless compassion, then there's no problem with it. And there's also no problem if you don't believe in rebirth. If there is rebirth, then we're going to be reborn, no matter what, whether you're Buddhist or what religion you follow or whether you believe or don't believe. If there is such a thing as rebirth, you will be automatically reborn. So, the most important thing is this life now, the one we're living right at the moment. This is the most important one, not your next one. When your next one comes, okay, that will become important. So when I said that rebirth doesn't matter, what I was saying was that the important thing is to live this life, help people in this life, and be the best possible person you can in this life, and take responsibility for your actions in this life. And if there is rebirth, then you've set yourself up for a good rebirth. If there isn't, then it doesn't matter because you've helped people in this life. So all this talk about, you can't be Buddhist unless you believe in rebirth is just ridiculous to me. I don't know where these people are coming from.
Well, I think I've experienced the same thing myself, and I'm wondering if the individuals who feel that way, and I want to respect that they do care about this. I do understand that. But Buddha himself was making the same point that you are making. What matters is what you do, and whether you believe in rebirth or not, the actions you take will result in the fruit. Either way, whatever that happens to be. And I'm wondering if they would tell him, you're not being a good Buddhist because you don't strictly adhere to rebirth. The thing that stood out for me in your book, and it's along these lines, is your chapter on misunderstanding Buddhism. And I'm wondering if you're seeing a lot of this adherence to doctrine interfering with the prioritization of human compassion about what we do being what this is really about.
Yeah, once you get locked in to an idea and you don't want to let go of that idea, then it's always going to hold you back. So if you're locked into the idea that there has to be rebirth, then you're not going to be able to see outside that circle of rebirth. And the same with impermanence and karma. I tell a story in here about a little boy from a village. His mother is mentally ill and she's out on the street and the little boy is out on the street. And, I had such compassion. And another monk said to me, "Oh yeah, it's his karma." And it really infuriated me because you can't dismiss human life that, oh yeah, it's his karma. Whether it is or whether it isn't is irrelevant. Can I help that boy? That's the most relevant thing. So when, you're just so fundamental, then you have a closed mind. I think, secular Buddhism is very similar to critical thinking because, you think like that horrible saying they use in business, think outside the box. Well, if you only believe in rebirth and you think everything is just karma, then you're in the box. You cannot think outside that box. So I think that people are holding themselves back and really misunderstanding Buddhism. I mean, Buddha never said that. Buddha never said that just dismiss people's, bad times as karma, or just say, oh, well, that's impermanence. I mean, these are just awful things to say. And where is the compassion? There is no compassion when you talk like that. I mean, the karma is a good teaching. You know, if you see it as cause and effect, you don't have to see it as it's going to fruition in my next lifetime. It will fruition in this lifetime. You kill somebody in this lifetime, then you will get the effect in this lifetime because you'll be put in prison. These are good teachings. But if you're just so closed mind and fundamental, then you are missing these teachings and you're certainly misunderstanding what Buddha said. That is my belief anyway.
The example you bring up from that chapter of a child who is suffering, whose lot in life, however they got there, and the suffering of his mother suffering from mental illness, to dismiss that, to use a teaching where Gautama makes it very clear that the holy path, it's friends, it's about relationship, it's about that connectedness. To use it as a way to dismiss someone else is very troubling.
Yeah, it's unforgivable actually. I mean that is not what Buddha meant. And I mean, if he said that, then why would we be following him? And how could he then really push generosity and compassion? If Buddha was thinking like that. I mean, he certainly wasn't thinking like that. And you can't dismiss people's lives. And, if you just say it's that boy's karma, it doesn't take anything else into effect. His mother was mentally ill. That's another cause. There are so many causes and conditions that have to come into play for just one little thing to happen. So just to put all these causes and conditions into one little label, oh, it's his karma, it's just ridiculous, and it's very, very cold-hearted. That's why I came back and I wrote that blog.
So with the book itself, do you have a personal favorite in there, or what's one of the topics that you like best?
I think maybe the superstition one, because it's the one that's caused the most discussion, and it's the one that still, people still read it and either believe it or not. And what I'm saying in there is that, these people who say they can predict the future are deceiving you. Even if they could, at that very moment, they would see the future. Okay. But it would only be the future at that moment. And I'm just saying, if they could, it would just be at that moment. Then other causes and conditions would come into play and that future would have changed. So they're just deceiving people. And they're stopping people taking responsibility. And I suppose that is why people go to these fortune tellers and wear lucky charms and all things like that, to stop them taking responsibility for their own actions. So I think superstition holds, Buddhism back and holds people's lives back. We have to take responsibility. If you're going to do an exam, then you need to study. And there's a clear connection there between the exam and the studying and then the passing the exam. So you can see the connection. There is no connection between you've got to do an exam. So you go and make an offering in a temple or you get a blessing from some guru. There's no connection. So if you just sit back and just think about it for a moment, superstitions, they cannot work. And people are making a lot of money out of, people's ignorance in a way, that people think that I can just go and somebody will tell me my future. And of course, when you go and have your future predicted, you only want to hear the good things. Yes, you're married a rich person and you're going to have a big house and a nice car. That's what you want to hear. You don't want to hear, yeah, you're going to lose all your money and you'll be begging on the street this time next year. People don't want to hear that. So superstition is the one in there that I like the best.
So Yeshe, what else would you like to share with the listeners about the book or the work that you're doing?
Well, the book, all I want to say is buy it.
I've got it right
And
here. I agree. I second that. Buy it. It's a good book.
thank you. The only other thing I want to just mention is because, I'm on a podcast here, that actually these blogs are also on a podcast now. A lot of my students were not English speaking. So when the blog came out, they couldn't really understand it and read it properly. So I started to do an audio blog. So I would write the blog and then a bit later I would record the blog and then people can then listen to it. So I talk a little slower so people can understand it. And the whole point was that it was just going to be an audio blog. And then people were emailing me and asking me to put it as a podcast. So then I said, okay, so for these people, but then it sort of took off a little bit. I mean, it's not professional. I don't know. Have you heard them, Ted?
Not yet. No.
No, well, they're not professional. I don't have an expensive microphone, or if somebody wants to donate one, it would be good. So I just record myself. I don't interview people. I just record my blogs on a podcast. And now I average about 1,700 plays on each podcast. So I don't know if
That's wonderful.
Is that good?
No, that's great. That's great. I've heard recently in a conversation with other podcaster that they were at a conference and they heard anything over 250, you're good.
Oh, okay. Then I'm great.
You're doing well. And it's helping people. You're reaching folks as well.
That's what I like about modern technology, really, that it's helping me reach people. Without Facebook and Twitter and Skype and, podcasts and the internet and that, then, I'll just be stuck in my little village in India and will know. But now that because of the internet, then, I'm all over the world and people are writing to me from all over the world. So, I know that Twitter and Facebook and that can be misused and can be quite boring. But, if you use them in the right way, they're a great tool.
They are. And I've enjoyed your tweets. They're very inspirational. And for folks who are listening who want to find out more, you can go to Karma Yeshe Rabgye's website, buddhismguide.org, and I'll be linking that on the episode page for this episode. Yeshe, thank you so much for being here. It's always nice to speak with you.
Yeah, thank you, Ted. Thanks for inviting me, and I look forward to the fourth time.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizen Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.